GM built this car, then ordered every prototype destroyed. 2 engineers read that order and immediately started hiding them. By the end of this investigation, you'll know the name of the man whose entire career was built on defying GM's rules, why the design GM destroyed ended up on the car GM was trying to protect, and how 2 engineers executed a plan so careful it took them nearly a decade to complete. Here is the detail that makes this story unlike anything else in American automotive history. A clay model of the Banshee was sent to Chevrolet and influenced the C3 Corvette Stingray. GM ordered the Banshee destroyed to protect the Corvette, then took the Banshee's design and used it to build the next Corvette. The car they killed became the car they kept. Pontiac's engineers watched GM dismantle their project, crush their vision, and then watched the 1968 Corvette C3 roll off the line wearing the Banshee's DNA, and Pontiac was never allowed to say a word about it.
Let me introduce you to another brand new series, the GTO.
Now, you need to understand the man who built it, and why GM's corporate machine had been watching him for years. John Delorean was Pontiac's chief engineer in the early 1960s, and he had already proven once that he was willing to break GM's internal rules to build the car he believed in. Delorean had managed to create the GTO by finding a regulation loophole, subverting GM's internal engine displacement policy by packaging a large V8 into a mid-size car in a way that technically didn't violate the letter of the corporate rule. The GTO launched the entire muscle car era. It was one of the most commercially successful cars in GM's history, and it happened because Delorean found the gap between what the rulebook said and what it actually prevented. By 1963, Delorean was already working on something even more ambitious. Design work on the XP833 had begun in August 1963, with the explicit goal of building a genuine 2-seat sports car. Not a pony car, not a muscle car, but a true sports car that would take the fight directly to the Corvette's market on Pontiac's terms. Motor City's GM's corporate leadership knew Delorean's track record. They knew exactly what he was capable of, and they were watching the Banshee project very carefully. Pontiac built 2 fully drivable XP833 prototypes, a silver hardtop coupe and a white convertible, both riding on a compact 90-inch wheelbase steel chassis wrapped in a fiberglass body. The same construction logic as the Corvette, but lighter and cheaper to produce. The numbers were devastating for GM's corporate hierarchy. The V8 convertible weighed over 300 pounds less than the Corvette convertible. The inline-6 coupe weighed almost 1,000 pounds less than the C2 Corvette. The Banshee would have undercut the Corvette's price by $1,000. In the 1960s, that's the gap between someone walking away and someone signing paperwork. Think about what those 3 facts meant simultaneously. A Pontiac that was lighter than the Corvette, faster in the configurations that mattered, and $1,000 cheaper, all while wearing a design that GM's own stylists considered more advanced than anything Chevrolet was producing. GM executives thought it would become a threat to Corvette sales. They weren't wrong. The Banshee wasn't just a threat to the Corvette's market position, it was a threat to the Corvette's reason for existing. Pontiac presented the XP833 to GM executives in 1964. The response was lukewarm, not because the XP833 wasn't a perfectly viable concept, but because GM was paranoid that Pontiac would steal the Corvette's thunder. Despite the corporate resistance, GM reluctantly gave Pontiac the go-ahead to produce the 2 working prototypes. Delorean's team built them in 1965, fully drivable, fully titled, mechanically complete cars. Then came the Memo. An official GM memo dated September 10, 1965, addressed to design chief Bill Mitchell, instructed his staff to rework clay models for a Chevrolet design for the 2-passenger version coupe, using the package logic Pontiac had proven could work. Now, read that carefully. On the same day GM issued the instruction that would ultimately cancel the Banshee, they were already redirecting its engineering logic toward Chevrolet. The 2-seat market belonged exclusively to Chevrolet, and GM corporate leadership had just put that in writing. With a single executive order, the XP833 project was summarily canceled, and all prototypes were immediately slated for destruction. GM believed destroying the physical evidence would ensure the sanctity of its hierarchy. No car, no precedent, no argument. But 2 men read that destruction order and made a different decision. Pontiac engineers Bill Collins and Bill Killen snuck the 2 prototypes away in shipping containers, where they would leave them for nearly a decade before purchasing them from GM directly. This wasn't a theft, it was something more sophisticated and more dangerous. They convinced the right people within GM's bureaucratic system to sell them the finished, titled prototypes rather than sending them to the crusher. The cars had VINs, they were titled. In the eyes of the paperwork, they could be sold rather than destroyed. The story of their survival is one of mild corporate theft, a desperate factory employee convincing the right people to sell him the finished titled prototypes instead of scrapping them. Collins and Killens then stored the cars for nearly a decade, waiting for the right moment to bring them out of hiding. The silver coupe with the overhead cam 6, the white convertible with the 326 cubic inch V8, both survived, both are real, both are still here, and GM spent years pretending they weren't. Here is where the Banshee story becomes something more than a corporate cover-up. It becomes a design history lesson that changes how you see two of the most iconic American cars ever built. The Banshee's flowing rear haunches and aggressive front end informed nearly every performance car Pontiac designed for the next decade. The 1967 Firebird, look at it alongside the Banshee. The roofline, the rear quarter treatment, the relationship between the hood and the fenders. The Firebird was the Banshee with its sports car identity replaced by muscle car packaging. And the Corvette. The clay model sent to Chevrolet influenced the C3 Stingray. Details like the removable roof panel hinted at later Stingray conventions. The car GM destroyed to protect the Corvette contributed directly to the Corvette's most celebrated generation. The Banshee concept was developed by several great GM designers including Jack Humbert, Ned Nichols, Paul Gillen, and Chuck Jordan. These weren't junior designers experimenting with clay. These were the people shaping GM's visual identity for a generation. Their work on the Banshee didn't disappear when the project was canceled. It migrated to Chevrolet, to the Firebird, to a decade of American automotive design that most people have no idea traces back to a car GM tried to erase. The two surviving Banshee prototypes have led extraordinary lives for cars that were supposed to not exist. After Bill Collins and Bill Killens finally completed their purchase from GM, nearly a decade after hiding the cars in storage, the prototypes eventually passed through private hands, appeared at major concours events, and surfaced at Barrett-Jackson auctions, where the automotive world finally got to see what GM had tried to destroy. The specific prototype showcased in the My Car Story video packed Pontiac's experimental 230 cubic inch overhead Cam 6 engine, coupled to a 4-speed manual transmission. It debuted publicly at the Muscle Car and Corvette Nationals in November 2025. 60 years after the Memo ordered it crushed, the cars are effectively priceless in the sense that matters. There are only 2 of them, their provenance is completely documented, and their survival is entirely dependent on the courage of 2 engineers who read a destruction order and decided it didn't apply to them. Pontiac never seemed to gain the strong foothold it deserved. The brand that gave America the GTO, the Firebird, and the Trans Am was eventually discontinued by GM in 2010. The Banshee never got a chance to define what Pontiac could have been in the sports car segment. Instead, it defined what the Corvette became, and Pontiac got the muscle car lane by default. We opened with a question: why would GM order the destruction of a car built by their own engineers? Now you have the full answer. The Banshee was too good, too cheap, and in the wrong hands. John Delorean had already proven once that he could outmaneuver GM's corporate rules. Giving him a 2-seat sports car platform was a risk GM's chairman was not willing to take twice, so they canceled it, ordered it destroyed, redirected its design to Chevrolet, and 60 years later, those 2 cars are still here. The most complete evidence that remains of what Pontiac could have been if GM's corporate hierarchy had ever let them try. If you followed the L88 Corvette, the Superbird, and the Boss 429 investigations on this channel, you already know the pattern. Detroit built extraordinary machines and then used corporate power to bury them. The Banshee is the purest version of that story. No insurance companies, no NASCAR rules, just one division that built something too good and another division that couldn't allow it to exist. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The next case file is already being researched, and it goes somewhere this channel has never been before. Drop a comment. If the Banshee had gone into production in 1965, what happens to the Corvette? Does it survive? I want to know what you think